Secretary Lew joins us now for an exclusive interview. Good afternoon to you, Mr. Secretary. Great to see you again.
Good to see you, Will.
So is it, are you so clearly supportive of this bill because of what goes into it, though accepting that perhaps now is no longer the ideal time for so much more stimulus?
Well, I have to be clear. I don't see this as being stimulus. I see this as being, in many ways, long overdue investment. And importantly, unlike stimulus, it is paid for. From the very beginning, the administration proposed paying for it. Congress is insisting on paying for it. And they're going through a process now where, piece by piece, CBO is scoring it. The Congressional Budget Office is scoring it. And before a bill is sent to President Biden to be signed, it will be paid for. So I think the question really is what the bill does, and it ought not to be about whether or not it is a new stimulus. The time for stimulus was very real during the COVID crisis, and now that we're coming out of it, the time to make investments, it ought to be paid for.
Are you happy with how some of it is paid for, or disappointed that some things got left by the wayside? We've spoken before about why the step up in basis of capital gains, for example, is always raised and then discarded as an issue.
Will, I think the most important thing is that Congress pay for it with serious provisions that are credible. I think they're doing that. I was very supportive of many of the original proposals, and if I had the ability to legislate on my own, I probably would have gone with some of those provisions. But I don't think that's really the issue right now. The issue right now is to get this done, because what's at stake is whether or not we provide child care and pre-K education to all American families. The question is whether we expand health care coverage and whether we make the investments that will help people get back into the workforce and build a better future for the country. I think that where they've ended up is something that ought to get through the Congress. I'm hopeful it'll get through the House this week, and then the Senate will finish it in the coming days. You never get a bill that has everything exactly the way you would have written it. I think this is coming out the result of negotiation and compromise. But importantly, at every step in the way, it's been clear that it has to be paid for. And I think that's important.
Is there a will to actually effectuate additional revenue to pay for it, however? I know you recently wrote an op-ed about this idea of building the IRS after a decade of decline to seek out lost income that otherwise wouldn't have been taxed. How much of a revenue driver would that be?
Look, I think it's an enormous revenue driver. The IRS has been defunded for 10, 20 years now. That means we don't have the resources for the IRS to be effectively watching, especially in the case of complicated tax returns, which is where most of the money and most of the tax revenue would be, watching carefully. Rebuilding the IRS will give us the ability both to have that kind of auditing done, but as importantly, we have a voluntary compliance system. When there is a perception that the IRS is on top of things, 95% of people comply. When there's a sense that the IRS is not watching, that goes down to maybe 50%. And I think that what this will do is create two things. First, the ability to catch mistakes and cheating, but it'll also bring people back in to do what they should do anyway, which is follow the law. I think when you look at the estimates, it's a bit confusing because it's a technical thing, but some estimators do give you credit for that compliance, voluntary compliance bonus, as it were. Other estimators don't. I look to the Treasury Department experts in the Office of Tax Analysis, who are most expert in this, and they actually only are taking credit for less than 10% of closing the gap. And that is what produces very substantial revenue. So I think the estimates actually understate what will really happen.